My name is Paul Wang. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician working at the Simons Foundation. I'm here to represent the Searchlight team and tell you about the work that that team has been doing with the inputs, obviously the critical central input of many families who are affected by SLC6A1. It's an honor to be here. Just as a bit of background for those who aren't familiar, the Simons Foundation is a nonprofit foundation founded by Jim and Marilyn Simons, and it's focused on math and science research generally. There's a particular part of it called Safari, which is focused on autism. The work that Simons has helped to fund and helped to do there has elucidated a lot of the genes that are associated with autism. And one of those that turned up in the Simons data very early on was SLC6A1. Since then, there's been a particular part of Safari that's been expanded to focus on these rare genetic neurodevelopmental disorders, and that is called Simons Searchlight. So the talk that I have today has a lot of different parts. I know that this is a mixed audience, if you will, families, academic researchers, people from industry as well, and hopefully at least part of the talk will be interesting to every one of you who are in the audience. Before I go any further, I do want to acknowledge the members of the Searchlight team who have really done a lot more than I have. I just happen to be the one who was asked to come up and speak to it, I think because I'm wearing like a blue coat and blue shirt and khaki pants like Jacob is. But I haven't seen everybody here in the audience today, but I think that Jamie is here, up here. Jane is here, I know. Caitlin is here. Jennifer is here, Curtis is here. I think there's also Janice from Geisinger. They've all been just like critical parts of the Searchlight team doing the work that I'm going to talk about today. So Simons Searchlight is a participant-centered project that collects this high-priority, useful data from families. I want to thank Dr. Goodspeed for already alluding to some of the data that we've collected. She mentioned a couple times Dr. Jennifer Bain, also a child neurologist like Dr. Goodspeed is, and the work that Dr. Bain did and those data that she referenced are data that come from you through the whole Searchlight project. Searchlight is a place that qualified researchers can request to use data for their own further research. So one of the things that we really pride ourselves on at Searchlight, at Simons in general, is so-called concept of open research, open science, that data really needs to be shared. It's not something we're going to sit on, but we want to share it with everybody who's interested, and as I'll hope to show you, that includes you guys, the families, as well as all of the researchers who are interested, whether they come from academia or industry. We're scalable, we continue to grow, and I want to let you know, realizing that there are a lot of different projects that families are asked to participate in. Natural history study that Dr. Goodspeed started to tell you about is going to be so important. That first-hand information where a single expert collects, or a small team of experts collect data directly from families, that's critical. We're also going to hear from people from Citizen and Invitae. That's very important as well. One of the things that distinguishes Searchlight is that it's an international effort. So I couldn't tell you exactly how many of the SLC6A1 families in Searchlight come from outside of the US, but all of our work is international, and so I think we uniquely are connecting information across the world. We use surveys that are standardized and validated. You heard a little bit again from Dr. Goodspeed about some of the quality of life data, some of the other kind of data as well. We're using these standard survey forms and collecting that data straight from the families, and it's free to participate. These different circles represent little different parts of information that I'll be touching on today. So as you've already heard, we're collecting detailed medical and behavioral histories along with blood samples. I'll show you some of the medical behavioral data and talk a little bit about what happens with the blood samples. We share those results back to families. I'll show you how that happens. I'll share it with qualified researchers. You've heard about that. And connecting participants and researchers from around the world. You're a tight community, which is fantastic, and I think thanks to Amber and other people in SLC6A1 Connect, word gets around quickly about the research projects that are going on so you know about it. Potentially, as you get to be a bigger community, and maybe this applies to other Searchlight groups besides SLC6A1, we can also really help in the dissemination of information about new studies that are coming around, sending that out to everybody in Searchlight to make sure that they know about it, so to make sure that the researchers can recruit from the entire community. So here's one way that we try to give information back to you. When families who participate in Searchlight fill out these personal reports, the social communication questionnaire, social responsive questionnaire, those are more autism-focused things. The Vineland, which looks at so-called adaptive behavior, day-to-day function, child behavior checklist, looking at various kinds of behavior issues. We create a dashboard for you, and you will see the results, the scores that are derived from the answers that you gave on these surveys. There are summary snapshots also of the whole SLC6A1 community. So this is what some of those summary snapshots look like. Here's just a graph showing the age of the people who are participating, showing how frequent various developmental and behavioral diagnoses are, how frequent, for example, GI problems are, gut problems. So there will be a summary snapshot page for the entire SLC6A1 community. And then we go around giving presentations, sharing data for publications, again, like Dr. Goodspeed has already illustrated for you. Step by step, what happens when a family participates in Searchlight? First, you sign up online, and to date, I think these sites are really pretty up to date. We've had 148 families sign up online, which is wonderful. We ask them for their genetic lab reports, really to document the diagnoses and to understand better the whole horizon, the whole scope of the genetic variation that you see. Everybody, of course, has a variant in the SLC6A1 gene, but you can have different variants in that gene. I'm getting the 5-minute warning here. You share the important history, fill out surveys, and if you're interested, only provide blood samples. There are a lot of different variants. I'm not going to go through all of this, but there are so-called CNVs, there are splice site or intronic mutations, frameshift nonsense, missense, et cetera, et cetera. This is, again, I won't go through this, but some of these particular variants recur in more than one child. And so we clue in on those, or the researchers do, and to try to figure out what is important there. What happens when you donate blood? This is all done remotely. Nobody has to go into any particular hospital to do it. But a blood sample kit is mailed to you. You can make an appointment, for example, at a local Quest lab, and then the sample is mailed back. With the help of funding from the Nancy Lurie Marks Foundation, combined with our own funding, we were able to create these iPSCs. Amber mentioned iPSCs already in the morning. I think you might hear a little bit about research using iPSCs later in the day. Mice are great, right? There's incredible stuff, incredible research you can do with mice. Ultimately, they're mice. They're not humans. And that's why iPSCs are felt to be so important, because they actually come from human beings, from Homo sapiens, with the actual mutations that people have. And so and those iPSCs can be made into nerve cells. They can be made into neurons, and we can look specifically at human cells to see what happens when you have that genetic variant. This is just an illustration of all the processes the lab goes through to create nerve cells from blood. And we're very happy to say that we're in the process of creating 6 different lines of iPSCs. One is already completed. It's available to researchers for a really nominal cost, $120 per sample, basically, like postage and sampling and handling. And then 5 others that are in the process with different mutations, each of them. And those will, I'm sure within the next few months, be available to researchers anywhere, again, in academia or industry, so that they can work with them. I'll briefly go over some of the medical history data. We have 57 participants so far, basically half and half, boys and girls. That's the age, so mainly we're talking about preschoolers or younger and early school age participants, but some going up into the young adulthood. No surprise to you, what's most commonly reported are issues with developmental delay, intellectual disability, and language delay as well. Autism in somewhat less than half. Low muscle tone, that's something you heard about also from Dr. Goodspeed. And then this umbrella term, movement disorder, is probably not the best word for it, but things like ataxia or tremor or things like that. Seizures, obviously, and I'm going to leave that to the neurologists who are much better qualified than I am to speak about. We have a category for endocrine problems, and the bars look big here, but if you look at the numbers, it's actually a small percentage, just 2% short stature, 2% obesity. This biggest bar, irregular menses, is actually only 5% of people who have responded, although, of course, the vast majority of participants are still pre-puberty. Vision problems, I think, is always important to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about a child with developmental issues, because if you can't see, it's going to be really, really hard to learn. Basically, everybody should be going to an ophthalmologist to get their vision checked out. Other medical issues, GI issues standing out. This is something that we hear about in a lot of developmental genetic populations. We're hearing about it from you as well. Medications used most commonly for seizures. Again, I'll leave it to the neurologist. Depending on seizure type, different medications may be more or less helpful. The Vineland is this scale about adaptive behavior, day-to-day function. And there are actually a couple ways to administer it. One is to have an examiner interview the parent, and the other is just as a survey where parents check off answers on a pretty long form. You can look at expressive language development. These are all different kids, the blue dots. This x-axis is age. So you see that language does improve over time as children get older. With these older kids, maybe older kids and young adults, somewhere around what you typically see at a 5-year-old level. I think the positive perspective on that is if you think of a typically developing 5-year-old, they talk pretty well. They speak fluently. So that is where we hope that all of your kids will be able to get to. Personal care skills, just things like dressing yourself, feeding yourself with a fork, they're doing better here than on expressive language, getting up to the early school age kind of level of function. I'm sorry to be going so quickly. I know my time is limited here. Social development, even with the diagnosis of autism for many, we do see improvement over the years as time goes by. Gross motor development, we know that this is an issue, and it seems that there's not a lot of change after 4 years of age or so, although we see some kids having a lot more in the way of motor skills than other kids do. And just in the way of piloting, if you will, different survey forms. You heard from Amber, you heard from Dr. Goodspeed as well about endpoints. How are we going to measure the severity of symptoms in our kids? One of the purposes that Searchlight serves very well is just like trying out these different standard scales to see what works. Child behavior checklist is one that's commonly used by psychiatrists and developmental pediatricians and neurologists as well. And has these categories, for example, aggression, sadness, anxiety, ADHD. These bars are mainly in the range of little to no concern. This is for the 21 kids whose parents responded who are still in the preschool years. And then that one bar, which is at least somewhat taller than the rest, oppositional behavior, now in the older kids in the school age range, does get into the area of at least mild concerns. I don't know SLC6A1 nearly as well as the families obviously do and the other clinicians in the room, but I think what this is telling us actually is that the CBCL is not a great instrument for measuring this, because we know that there are significant behavior issues for a lot of you, and it's just not really standing out on this particular scale. So that's good information to have. When you look at specific individual issues, difficulty waiting, being impatient, being quickly frustrated, this is probably something that the families know very well. That was in the preschool kids, and then in the older age range, obsessions, impulsive behavior, demanding frequent attention as well. I'm just going to end where I think Dr. Goodspeed ended as well on the quality of life. She highlighted some areas which are significant concern. For example, the negative emotion. I think the quality of life survey is doing better in highlighting that than the CBCL was. I just want to show you maybe some of the more positive results that we got from the quality of life data that families have been submitting. So on activities and the outdoors, kids are able to enjoy Physical activities, 97%. Enjoy outings, 91%. Enjoy time outdoors, 88%. Smiling, expressing happiness through their body language, laughing or giggling. Obviously, thanks to everything that you as parents, as family members do, you're giving your kids this quality of life. They are able to enjoy themselves at least much of the time. Similarly, of course, they're happy when they're understood. They feel relaxed when making eye contact, initiating greetings with others, and able to help a bit around the house with routines, enjoying making things. These are the enriching activities you're doing for them. And obviously, for those kids who are not able to express themselves, they're, of course, incredibly grateful for everything that you're doing for them. So I just wanted to end on that note. Thank you very much.